Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and we are back here today with episode 3 of Against the Odds. So, last week we did some craziness with BioVisionary, and as always, we had a voting, put up a poll, and you guys were awesome. We almost broke 2,000 votes this week, up almost 300 votes from episode 1 to episode 2. So, thank you so much for voting, super awesome. Let's break the 2K mark this week. That would be cool. Anyway, the voting. Illusions came in first place, and this one wasn't particularly close. Last time, BioVisionary and Tainted Remedy were neck and neck through the whole voting. This one, Illusions got a pretty comfortable lead and just kind of rode it out the whole time. Tainted Remedy, always the bridesmaid, never the bride, comes in second for the second week in a row. I assume that Tainted Remedy, after almost winning the first voting, would just clearly win this week, but apparently a lot of people that voted for BioVisionary jumped over to the Illusions bandwagon, because Illusions was third place the week before, instead of going with Tainted Remedy. So anyway, Tainted Remedy comes in second. It will remain on the ballot this week, along with Chance Encounter Legacy putting up a bit of a showing. So Chance Encounter comes in third at 20%. Days Undoing dropping off the ballot this week. Not quite enough, 20 votes short of passing Chance Encounter and staying on the ballot for another week. And bringing up the rear, with only 14% of the vote, Dramatic Entrance. Anyway, Modern Illusions. This deck is awesome. Just being serious, like, I almost felt bad playing this for Against the Odds because I never felt like I was against the odds. I actually felt like I was favored, and the matches actually bear this out. This deck is just very, very strong. It plays a lot like Merfolk, as you can see. The framework of it is very similar to Merfolk, but it has some advantages, also some disadvantages, but it does have some advantages over the other blue deck in Modern. Anyway, so we got a lot of illusions going on. Our 1-drops, we have 4 Jace's Phantasm, 1/1 flyer for 1 blue mana. If your opponent gets 10 or more cards in his or her graveyard, it gets +4/+4. Never actually managed to pull that off. That might be a challenge in and of itself. Can we turn on Jace's Phantasm? So 1-drop number 1. 1-drop number 2, the classic Phantasmal Bear, the original Delver of Secrets. A 2/2 for 1 blue mana, a bear illusion, and whenever it is targeted with a spell or ability, you have to sacrifice it. 2-drops. We have 3 different 2-drops. We have 4 copies of Kravokian Mist. This card is awesome. This is a flyer for 1 and a blue, and it is star. Its power and toughness is equal to the number of illusions on the battlefield. So it is a 1/1 flyer for 2 mana, but when you have Jace's Phantasm, Phantasmal Bear, and all this other stuff going on, it can be a 4/4, a 5/5, a 6/6, and just be like this massive flyer for 2 mana. It's basically the Tarmogoyf of illusions, except it has evasion, so I guess it's probably just better than Goyf. Anyway, Lord of the Unreal. The one downside of illusions is we only get 1 actual Lord. The upside is the Lord is insane. Not only do we have the typical Lord stats, so 2 blue mana, you get a 2/2, just like all the Merfolk Lords. It gives all of our illusions +1, very much like a Merfolk Lord, but it also gives them hexproof, and this is just amazing. One of the problems with Merfolk is the way you beat the deck is just by killing all their lords and their creatures. Well, Lord of the Unreal, why it's not actually an illusion itself, it gives all of the rest of our creatures hexproof, and we got this really sweet trick we can do to even make the Lord hexproof. That is where Phantasmal Image comes into play. Phantasmal Image, this is one of my favorite cards. It is just so sweet. Fell in love with this card cube drafting, and I'm glad to see it's carrying over into Constructed. So for 1 and a blue, you get a 0/0. When it enters the battlefield, it clones something, so it becomes a copy of that creature, except it is an illusion in addition to its other types, and it gains when it is targeted by a spell or ability, you sacrifice it. So, Phantasmal Image, the reason it is here is to copy Lord of the Unreal. If you copy Lord of the Unreal, Phantasmal Image is still an illusion, so it gives itself a bonus and is a 3/3 hexproof that gives all of our other illusions +1/+1 and hexproof. It is absolutely nuts. When we pull that off, this deck is almost impossible to beat. When we can have a Phantasmal Image copying Lord of the Unreal, I think it is just straight up better than Merfolk. Of course, I mean, those are 2 cards, and we don't always draw them together, but when it happens, our deck is just absolutely nuts. Our opponent just can't do anything, and we beat them to death with our Phantasms. Jace's Architect. This is our other Lord, also not an illusion, but it's the best we can do. You really need more Lords to play this kind of strategy, so 1 and 2 blue, you get a 1/3. Other blue creatures, which all of our creatures are, get +1/+1. And then it has a bunch of other abilities that don't really apply to our deck. You can pay 1 to turn an artifact into a blue creature, and then you can tap an untapped blue creature to add 2 mana, but it can only be spent on artifacts or to activate the abilities of artifacts. So this is basically just another Lord for our deck. 1 copy of Illusionary Servant, probably the worst creature in our deck. It is a 3/4 flyer for 3. But it still dies to Lightning Bolt and Dark Blast and anything because it has the illusion ability where it is targeted by a spell or ability, it dies. Finally, Illusory Angel. This one is a little bit hit or miss. It is an illusion, an angel illusion, 4/4 flyer for 2 and a blue. You can only cast it if you've cast another spell this turn. So that means you really can't cast it on turn 3 very easily. But it is big and flying, and it gains bonuses from our Lords, so it is still in the deck because we don't really plan on casting it. Just like the Merfolk deck, we are an Ether Vial deck. So the one card we want in our hand more than anything else is an Ether Vial. When we play an Ether Vial on turn 1 and can start ticking that up and cheating on mana, our deck is very difficult to deal with, just like Merfolk. And this is how we get to play Illusory Angel, because we can vial it in when our Ether Vial is on 3, and we don't have to deal with that pesky cast another spell trigger. It just comes into play and beats down in the air very efficiently. Then we have a few spells. 4 copies of Vapor Snag, just a nice tempo play. Also loses our opponent a life. Sometimes that is really relevant when it gets down near the end of the game. We also can use this in conjunction with Ether Vial to bounce one of our own creatures in response to removal and immediately vial it back into play. So you can do some tricky things with Vapor Snag. Then we also have 3 copies of Dismember, just another way to deal with problematic creatures. Being a mono blue deck, we don't really have that many options as far as removal, but thankfully Wizards sometimes does crazy things and prints a spell that is 1 colorless mana and 4 life to kill basically anything in the format. So we take full advantage of Dismember. Finally, another trick I picked up from watching the Merfolk deck, Monastery Siege. So Monastery Siege is really cool. It is a 3 mana, so 2 and 1 blue enchantment. You get to pick one of 2 options. So the first option is cons, and you basically get to loot on your upstep, or on your draw step. You get to draw an extra card, and then you have to discard a card. This helps us in the late game kind of power through. One thing we don't have is a real good source of card advantage, so this helps us sift through and get through those like piles of lands that you hit sometimes, and just smooths out our draws a little bit to make sure we have action. Other option is Dragons, which says spells your opponents cast that target you or permanents you control to cost 2 more to cast. This is super awesome in our deck because this isn't, like, this reminds me of the Frost Titan ability, which is counter the spell unless the caster plays 2. But this is different. You actually have to pay the mana to cast it. So because our creatures, most of them, have the Phantasm sack it if it's targeted clause, this actually still protects them and means our opponent can't just cast a Lightning Bolt for 1 mana, say, oh, never mind, I won't pay the 2, your creature dies anyway because of their triggered ability. They actually have to pay 3 mana for that bolt or 4 mana for that Abrupt Decay just to target our creature. So even though our creatures are phantasms, because of the way Monastery Siege is worded, it still provides protection, and that might even be more important than our deck and some other decks because of that sacrifice clause. So those are the creatures and the spells. Land-wise, pretty simple. 13 islands, the best of the basics. 4 copies of Mutavault, just excellent in any tribal-based strategy. And 3 copies of Ghost Quarter. Onto the sideboard, 2 Dispels, counters an instant for 1 blue. 2 Relic of Progenitus, Graveyard Hate. 2 Spell Pierce, 2 copies of Echoing Truth, bounces everything. This is especially nice when our opponent has Ensnaring Bridge or something like that, which we just don't really have any outs to in the main deck. Copy of Hurkyl's Recall, 4 copies of Spreading Seas, the blue Fulminator Mage. This comes in against Tron or against decks with that are heavily dependent on manlands and gives us a shot against those decks. Finally, 2 copies of Unified Will, counter target spell if you control more creatures than that spell's controller. So we can bring this into battle against control decks since we will almost always have more creatures than they will. And then when we do have more creatures, it's just the best counter ever printed. It's a counter spell for 1 and a blue. So anyway, that's the deck. Hope you enjoy the videos, and I will talk to you later.